Greetings and welcome to Austin, Texas gardening. This video is going to be all about growing peach trees in the suburbs of Austin, Texas. If you've been watching my channel for some time, you'll know that in the fall of 2021, I planted 8 peach trees in my backyard orchard. There's an assortment of Tex Prince peach trees, Royal Zest trees, and some other ones, but they've been doing great, and I've gotten the benefit of reaping a harvest this spring and summer. We had a staggered harvest in May, June, and July, where I collected nearly 200 pieces of fruit from these small peach trees, and I decided that I'd make a video explaining how I did it. I also have a little bit of experience with growing peach trees in my old home. A friend of mine gifted me a really large peach tree from his backyard, which I transplanted into my old home, and so I've had some experience with peach tree harvests. If you are curious about seeing anything in particular, I recommend taking a look at the video chapter timestamps. In this video, I'll be explaining the process for digging the holes that I used to plant these trees. I'll be explaining general maintenance, that is watering, pruning, and fertilizing. I'll be discussing some issues that I faced with pest control and with disease. We'll take a look at one of our harvests and see the quality of our fruit. And then finally, I'll share some closing thoughts. This brings us to Chapter 1, which is planting peach trees and soil quality. When I purchased my new home in 2021, I knew I wanted to plant a backyard orchard. But unfortunately, because of the way that they construct these new homes, my backyard is full of this really dense clay soil. This is mostly yellow clay soil, but as you can see, there's some darker tones mixed in here. This soil isn't completely nutrient void, but it's very difficult to work with, especially during a drought. One of my most viewed videos is about building a French drain for this backyard orchard. One of the difficult things that I encountered working with this dense clay soil is that it drains very poorly, and my trees were often getting overwatered or underwatered. I added some earthworms and perlite to improve the soil, but it didn't help too much. The good thing is that peach trees are really hardy, and while they'd prefer to be growing in black clay soil, they can tolerate my yellow and red clay soil. In this next scene, I'm scoring the hole. So I've dug a hole which is 18 inches across and 18 inches deep for my sapling. You will need to do some research on what size hole you should dig. It's dependent on the diameter of the trunk of your sapling. Mine is about 1 inch across, so we're doing 18 inches across and deep for my hole. And then, as I mentioned, I'm scoring the hole here. So I'm shoving my shovel into the side of the hole to create these gaps where the roots can grow. I planted these trees by mixing yellow clay with potting soil in my wheelbarrow, and when I put them in the ground, I like to shake the root ball pretty vigorously just to loosen up all of the roots. If you want to plant fruit trees in your backyard, the best time to do this is in the fall, but you can get away with it in the winter or maybe early to mid-spring, but you don't want to plant these in the summer. The combined transplant shock and heat will usually kill them, especially if you're in Central Texas. This brings us to Chapter 2, which is watering, fertilizing, and pruning to increase harvest. As I'm talking about this, I just want the viewers to keep in mind that the video on screen right now is from 2023, but I'm going to be addressing watering immediately after planting the trees. For the first couple of months, I would water about 2 to 3 times a week, and from there, I would just let the rain water the trees unless we were in a drought. So for example, in the summer of 2022, we had a drought, and my frequent watering combined with the French drain has really helped this peach tree to put out a lot of young, new growth. These green shoots are going to be the branches that eventually our peaches grow on. The peaches only grow on the new growth. So you can see the peaches that are already on this tree are growing on what I call redwood, which is about the thickness of a pencil, maybe a little thinner, and the green wood that I was just looking at a moment ago is going to be next year's redwood. So this is a good segue into pruning. Keep in mind that pruning stimulates growth, so this is something that I almost always do in late winter or very early spring. When you prune your trees, they're going to put out lots of green new shoots, and you would almost never want to cut those green shoots off unless they were in an undesirable location like the base of your tree. Ultimately, there's all sorts of different ways you can train your tree. Most people like to try to get their trees to grow horizontally instead of vertically, so if your tree is growing vertically, you can cut that off. Obviously, nobody wants to try to harvest fruit that's 12 feet high. In my case, this tree on screen here has a branch that's a little long and very horizontal and very heavy and is at risk of breaking. So when you're pruning your trees, keep that in mind, and as they're developing fruit, if you see a branch that looks like it's about to break, it's worth just removing some of the fruit so that the branch isn't stressed too much. I also want to address how I fertilize. I've said this in a couple of other videos, but about 4 times a year, I use 13-13-13 fertilizer, which is just a balanced fertilizer containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium as directed on the bag. You can get this from basically any hardware store, and it really helps the trees being in this very nutrient void space. Keep in mind, the greatest strength of peach trees is their hardiness. Some of the trees that were encased in ice this last winter did just fine and put out a great crop this spring. Chapter 3 is about pestilence and pests. We really did have a great harvest this year. Every tree yielded somewhere between 20 and 35 pieces of fruit, and many of them were super healthy like these here, but unfortunately, a lot of disease and a lot of pests got the best of our food. So this may look like the flies did this, or maybe some sort of wasp did this, but the telltale sign right there is the bird poop on these peaches. What happened after the first couple of months, and especially once the peaches started to change color, some sparrows must have noticed that I basically had a buffet set up in my backyard. And from that point, it was a race against the clock. A lot of my peaches had to be harvested early. You can see some of the ones in this video. We would have the sparrows pecking at the peaches where they wouldn't eat them, they'd just nibble a small hole in them, and then those would get infected by fungus or ants and flies and other things. In years past, I've had some difficulty with mud dauber wasps and other types of predatory wasps attacking my peach trees by laying eggs on them, and they lay some sort of jelly on them which digests the peaches. But in 2023, the biggest challenge were sparrows. There are all sorts of different ways to deal with this. I dealt with this by harvesting early, but I've seen a lot of other people put out paper mache owls and other sorts of fake predators to scare away squirrels and birds. You can also encase your fruit in little plastic shells or net your tree by putting a big net over it. And I got some film here of the birds just hanging out in my tree there. Look at that. Wonderful. But birds need food too, and I'm glad I got to share some of my crop with them. I think I really did get the lion's share. This is an issue almost anywhere, but I've noticed new construction usually suffers from less pests. My theory is that without the mature oak trees, we just have less squirrels in general. That being said, the best way to deal with this is to net your tree. I chose not to worry about netting any of my trees, and while most of my fruit came to harvest, even some of the best pieces had blemishes from birds pecking the fruit. As you can kind of see here, there's a few of these brown spots. When you look closely, usually there's some sort of defect in the fruit. Truth be told, this is really nothing to worry about, and it gives me a real deep appreciation for the abundance of produce that we'll have at a grocery store that are totally without defect. Chapter 4 is about the harvest and fruit quality. So as I've just addressed in the previous section, some of my fruit had to be harvested early. That's really obvious from this shot here where you have small peaches mixed in with larger ones. Most of the larger pieces of fruit that I harvested were Tex Prince peaches. This tree here that I'm picking from right now is a Tex Prince peach tree, but I also have a few Royal Zest trees, and most of my smaller pieces of fruit came from the Royal Zest trees. Tex Prince and Royal Zest 2 peach trees both need 500 chill hours to produce a crop. With the very cold winters that we've had the last 3, including big winter storms every winter, I haven't had any problem getting my chill hours in. I wanted to give my fruit an opportunity to mature, so we did our first harvest in late May. The yellow pieces of fruit are Tex Prince peaches, and the more plum-looking ones are Royal Zest. Here are a pair of Tex Prince peaches. The flesh inside of these peaches is probably what you're familiar with from the grocery store They're yellow, sweet, juicy, classic peaches. I'm really glad that I picked this for my backyard orchard. I found that these are some of the easiest to do, and I'd highly recommend them if you're looking to get started. During our final harvest, we had to bring in everything before the sparrows got to them. That meant even really small pieces of fruit that weren't that mature, or maybe not totally ripe. On the right, we've got a Tex Prince that's a little underripe, and on the left, those are two Royal Zests, which are a little underdeveloped. We enjoyed sharing this fruit with our friends and family, but of course, because it's Texas, we had to bake it into a cobbler. Finally, Chapter 5, some lessons learned. In some of my other videos, I've said that a big part of the hobby of gardening is just watching your plants die. Of the 8 trees that I planted 2 years ago, only 6 are still alive. 2 of them died from overwatering before I installed my French drain and then underwatering during the drought that followed. At this point though, peach trees still have the best run of anything else I've planted in my backyard gardening space. I planted fig trees several times, brown turkey and celeste, and of course I'm not going to go film at the house that I sold, but one of the fig trees I planted is doing very well and is almost 4 feet tall today. I've noticed though, many of the things that I've planted have died, and peach trees have died in a much smaller percentage. If you're looking for something to plant in Central Texas or similar gardening zone, or maybe you just have a similar climate, it's worth trying to start with a peach tree. I hope you found this video informative and helpful as you consider starting your backyard orchard or maybe adding to it. If you're still watching at this point in the video, I wish you good luck with all your backyard orchard projects this fall, and thank you again for watching Austin, Texas Gardening.